We're going to move right on into our next segment, move this thing right along. We have two individuals that are going to join us. Donna King of Forward Land will join us in a moment, talking about a view to 2040, what's down the road. But right now, let me welcome. And by the way, let me back up. I forgot to mention that the session there with Mr. Tannery, our speaker sponsors, First Bank Southwest and Covenant Title Company. Thank you very much for that. Upland Resources here in Canadian. The Payton family presents our next segment, and we welcome Frank Young of Unit on long laterals and division orders.
All right, well, good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here, honored to be here. My presentation is only about 15 slides, so that'll make some of you happy. I'm going to talk about long laterals, and then Donna will talk about more of the land and division order interest portion of long laterals. But first, I just want to say that I worked for an accountant back in Tulsa, and so as an engineer, I've learned to keep it really simple. And also Bailey Payton, who some of you know, is on Unit's board, and so I have to present to both the accountant and Bailey every quarter when we have our board meeting. And so I've also not just learned to keep it simple, but mainly I just show pictures now because he seems to get that a little bit better. Before I get started on my presentation, I would just like to say, previously the attorneys that spoke had everybody saying, it depends, it depends, it depends. And I would say, working for Unit Petroleum, but also being a member of this community for my whole life, and being a surface owner and a mineral owner, I would say it also depends on who you're dealing with and what company you're dealing with. And it makes a difference if the company, like Unit, has been in this area for 30 years. And the only way you can operate in this area with all of the rascals that live around here is to be honest and to do what you say you're going to do. And I've been with Unit for 11 years. I think we do a good job of that, and we're going to continue to do that as long as I'm there. All right, so my presentation is about long laterals. I don't know if you're going to put that on the screen. Do I have the clicker? Maybe it's my job. Oh, okay. All right. All right, he's loading it. So while he's loading, I'll tell you a little bit about my background because I think it's pertinent to the discussion. I was born in Canadian. I was raised on a ranch out on the Washita River, about 20 miles southwest of Canadian. And during that time, there was a lot of work that we did out on the ranch. I had 4 brothers and sisters. I also had 7 first cousins and uncles and aunts that all lived out on the ranch together. So there was always a lot going on. We had a feedlot, we had cattle grazing, we had fields to plow and plant and harvest, and we had all the daily chores that you have out on a ranch. We also had a lot of fun. I learned to fish and hunt. I love the Washita River. And I love this area. In fact, I came down on Friday a little early so that I could do some fishing, and I did do fishing. And I did do quite well on Saturday and Sunday. So I had a good time doing that. But I say that because all during that time that I was growing up with my brothers and sisters and my cousins, and besides the activity going on the ranch, another thing that was going on all that time was oil and gas activity. So I grew up with natural gas and oil production being around me. There was often pumpers on our land. There were, derricks on our land drilling wells. There were lease agreements to negotiate. There were right-of-way damages to negotiate. And so because of that experience, that led me, after graduating from Canadian High School, to go into petroleum engineering and get a degree from Texas Tech. And then I spent 17 years with Anadarko, and now I've spent 11 years with Unit Petroleum, and I've lived, and they've moved me around a lot. In my career, I've lived in 7 different towns. I currently live in Tulsa. But all during that time that I was moving, and seeing all kinds of different things, offshore and internationally and everywhere you can think of, this place was always my home. This is what I think of. When I think of home, I think of Canadian Texas, and I think of the ranch out on the Ouachita River. So when I give this presentation, I do give it as an employee of Unit Petroleum, but also give it, I could just as easily be setting out in the audience being a surface owner or mineral owner. So hopefully that gives me a little bit of a unique perspective. All right, a little bit about Unit. I'm not going to talk much about Unit, but I do want to, this has a purpose in showing the kind of impact that oil and gas activity from one company has on this community. We employ 85 people. We have an office in Canadian, and so we provide a lot of jobs, and we support local community projects. In addition, we've been here 30 years, and we have other smaller offices, one in Booker, one in Shattuck, one in Woodward. And so we have a big impact on the community in terms of the people that we have hired and the employees that we have. And I can tell you, those people are very, very fine people. From an operational presence, we operate 900 wells. So even when we're not drilling, we generally have 3 to 5 workover rigs running. You'll see those for those of you that may have minerals in places where Unit has the lease. We also are operating currently a 1 to 2 drilling rig program. And currently our program is out in the Buffalo Wallow area south of Canadian. And then we have constant interaction with surface owners and mineral owners. And the financial impact, I know Andy mentioned it at the start of the day when he said the oil and gas industry impacts the Texas Panhandle to the tune of about $1.3 billion. I assume that's for this county. And for how many, is that just 1 year? Yes. So that's a lot of money, and this is how it comes here. So Unit over the last 5 years has spent $500 million drilling and completing wells. And you may say, well, some of that money doesn't stay here. Some of it goes to the service companies you use, and that's true. But a lot of the service companies we use are here in the Texas Panhandle. A lot of those people, along with the Unit employees, stay in hotels here. They eat here. They buy gasoline here. A lot of that money does stay here. And then we pay about $150 million that we've paid over the last 5 years in oil and gas royalties. That money is primarily people that live here and spend that money here. And then we paid $10 million in county taxes. So we have a big impact on the economy, and we're just one of the smaller companies. We're not the big dog in this area, but when you think about Unit in relation to all the other companies that are out here, you can begin to understand the impact financially that the oil and gas industry has in this area. I should have brought my glasses, I guess. Today I just want to talk about that in terms of our drilling and completion activity. Currently, with gas prices the way they are, it's predicated on being able to drill extended laterals. So that's why I want to talk about that today. Well, if we're running okay. So for those of you that just aren't familiar with the Granite Wash, which is what I'm going to focus on today, this is a map that shows the counties in the Texas Panhandle and where the Granite Wash lays underneath the land. So it covers a lot of Hemphill County. I was raised in southwest Hemphill County, and the field that we're active in is in southwest Hemphill County. One thing I want to show is that prior to about 2015, most of the activity, the horizontal drilling activity in the Granite Wash, was spent on what I would call normal length or shorter laterals. And so these two pictures show that between 2010 and 2015, when gas prices were better, you saw 1,100 horizontal normal length or shorter laterals drilled, those being defined as laterals that have a lateral length of say less than 5,000 feet. And over that same time period, about 37 wells were drilled that were extended laterals, most of those down in Wheeler County. Those would be wells that have lateral lengths more than 6,000 feet. And so you were starting to see extended lateral technology emerge. But because gas prices were high, there wasn't a big need to really push the envelope in terms of the technology required to drill a longer lateral. Now when you flash forward to 2016 to present, natural gas prices have fallen, natural gas liquids prices have fallen, activity drops off tremendously, and now you see that only 46 normal length laterals have been drilled in that time frame, and there's been 26 extended laterals, and most of the drilling in the Granite Wash now is extended laterals. All of the drilling that Unit does are extended laterals. And the reason for that is because they're more economic, and the gas prices have caused us to make this shift. This is where our Buffalo Wallow field is. So why did Unit switch to longer laterals? First, just to make sure we're all on the same page. These pictures depict a two-section area. There's a couple of ways you could develop this. One, you could develop it with horizontal normal length lateral wells where you have 2 wells in each section, or you can develop it, as shown on the right, with a 10,000 foot lateral, just 1 well bore. And what are the advantages to that? Why would Unit want to do that? First, on the drilling and completion cost, to drill 2 of those laterals, the cost is about $10.8 million, whereas to drill the one 10,000 foot lateral, which intersects the same amount of reservoir, or actually more reservoir than the 2 4,500 foot laterals, the cost is about $7.5 million. So you save about 31% on your drilling and completion costs. That's one of the components that lets us stay active in this area. If you just look at the longer lateral compared to one of the shorter laterals, the cost does increase by 39% when you compare 1 well to 1 well. But in terms of intersecting the same amount of reservoir, it takes 2 of those shorter laterals, so your total cost is down 31%. Additionally, we have lower infrastructure cost. This shows, again, the two wells on the left, where you have a pad for each well, you have a drilling pit for each well, potentially a frac pit for each well, you have a road, and you have a pipeline for each well. That's about twice the infrastructure required for the 10,000 foot lateral, and so your costs to do all that are obviously cheaper for the longer lateral. Also, we see a reserve increase per well, and so you can see with the two laterals, we do a total of around 22 or 23 frac stages in a normal length lateral that spans about 4,500 feet. In the longer lateral, we'll do 50 frac stages. The difference being that in the longer lateral, you not only intersect everything that the 2 shorter laterals do, but you also recover reserves and more fully develop the area on the section lines. So you get a chance to, and with the standoffs being between 200 foot and 467 foot for the normal length laterals, you have the potential to intersect 400 to 800 foot more of Granite Wash reservoir, and that makes a difference on the reserve side. This graph just shows for the first year our experience at Buffalo Wallow. The bottom line is the production for the first year for a normal length lateral, and you can see it's difficult to see on the y-axis, but that's showing a cumulative production amount on the y-axis. And then on the blue line, you can see what the longer lateral is that we've had out in Buffalo Wallow. And the difference is that we get about 126% increase in our production during the first year, which makes a huge difference to the economics. It allows us, there was a fellow that talked earlier today that said the break-even price or the price required to get a 10% rate of return in the Granite Wash out here was about $4 per MMBTU. Well, gas isn't $4 per MMBTU, so how are we making money doing this? And we're making that return by drilling the longer laterals, having saltwater disposal systems in place, and also because we have a sister company called Superior that has a processing plant out on the Norris Ranch south of town, where we also share in the proceeds of the processing plant. So as a corporation, and so those things allow us to stay active in this area. Okay, this is an actual example of what we've done in the Buffalo Wallow field. Here I've used 3 sections because out there we've typically drilled 7,500 foot laterals, not 10,000, although we have drilled a few 10,000 foot laterals successfully. But on the left you have our current extended lateral development scenario, just showing the smaller footprint that we have. And I bring this up because I feel like extended laterals not only offer a benefit to mineral owners and the petroleum company, but they also offer a benefit to surface owners because there's a smaller footprint. And you can see that here where you compare a 3-section development with extended laterals versus a 3-section development with the shorter laterals. This is an actual picture of that pad that I just showed, the car pad, and it's a little difficult to see, but those are all of our oil tanks and storage there. But you can see, if you look closely, 4 wellheads all right together. So you can imagine how that's a much more efficient way of developing the reservoir when you can put 4 wells. And then on this pad, we plan to eventually have 4 more wells on this same pad. So we'll have potentially 8 wells on this pad over the next few years, and it's just significantly less of a footprint for the surface owners, much more efficient operation. All right, so again, just the better economics leads to more activity. I've talked about this. These arrows on the bottom are a 1 well. They're a comparison on the cost side for 1 long lateral versus 1 short lateral. So in that case, we do spend 39% more capital to drill the long lateral versus 1 short lateral. But as I showed, our production goes up by 126%, and that leads to better economics. You know, it actually makes the wells economic versus not being economic, which keeps us, you know, running rigs in this area and developing the minerals that we have leased. And then I'll just leave you with this slide. I've already went over this, but it is important to understand how much of an impact the industry has. And I would just say, you know, without you know, stepping on anybody's toes, before you decide to pick a fight or rattle our cage, we would love for you to give us a phone call and let us know what we're not doing well for you and what you would like for us to do better at. Because sometimes things that you see that need to be done when you live out there every day, we don't hear about, or I don't hear about. And so I have people that call our production superintendent, Mark Murphy, or call the Tulsa office, and we try to be responsive to any requests that you guys make. So that's my presentation. I think Donna is going to do her presentation, and then we'll answer the Q&A together after she finishes hers.
How is everybody today? So awake, ready to go? Good, good. I'm glad I got you when you're about asleep. We're going to have a long math class, so I hope you have your calculators, shoes, and socks off. It's going to be about 2 hours of really intense math. Everybody's excited. My name is Donna King. I grew up on a farm in Kingfisher, and my mom is here with me today, so I'm going to be real cheesy, and everyone, thanks for Mom for coming out. I'll get a lecture on that on the way home, and I'm too old for her to ground me, so we're fine. Okay, so we'll get started. So what we'll go over is kind of like, okay, now Frank is drilling these really long, engineering's drilling these really long laterals. You're getting a lot of production. Everything's exciting, but how do I get paid? Where do I do with all of my lease information, the spacing, the you know, rules and regulations for my state? How do I make that happen? And most of the time, I just tell people that I'm like Chandler Bing. If anybody watched Friends, nobody really knew what he did, but he worked on spreadsheets all day. That's kind of me. So I come from a division order background. I started at Chesapeake and was there for 9 years, worked with Bryce and Ronnie and Henry, who was here earlier. So I enjoy all the friends that we got to make, but I learned a lot in the process too. And I know that all of you are familiar with division orders, and you're like, why do I get these? I'm not going to sign them. I'm going to throw them in the trash. Well, I can tell you they're important if you want to make sure that we have the right name on the title. So if we don't have the right name on title, you need to notify us and say, okay, I've sold my interest, or I really hold this in joint tenancy, send in your deed, so we can get that taken care of. It's also likely to set out your net acres. It's definitely going to set out your unit interest, and what we're really trying to do is verify that you are we have the right address on file as well as the right tax ID, and you can kind of confirm and say, okay, yes, I have the right lease rate, all of this looks good. But then they have a bunch of numbers, and they're usually out to the 8th decimal place, and you're probably wondering how that happens. It also kind of notifies you that a unit has come on to production, a new well is online, and you can contact your local division order analyst or landman to talk about any other issues that may be going on. Okay, and a lot of people don't know what division orders does, and again, that's just kind of just an overview of, we take all of the leases, all of the rules and regulations that are out there from the spacing regulatory commissions, all of the state laws that are statutes that are applicable to royalty payment, and make sure that everybody at the end of the day gets translated into like this numerical magical spreadsheet and gets billed and paid appropriately. So that's in a nutshell kind of what all goes on. I would say make friends with your local division order analyst if you have a lot of questions about how your interest is calculated, and they can help. Okay, so now is where we get into the part where you should get out your calculators. I'll make it as simple as possible. Kidding, it's all done for you. Okay, gross working interest, so who shares in the bills, so who's going to be responsible for all the costs of drilling a well. And then the net revenue interest is, well, how does that shake out on the revenue side? How quickly am I going to get that return on investment or a royalty check? And then an allocation factor. Allocation factors are going to be key. Hope you took a lot of notes with Henry's presentation because this kind of leverages off of some of that information. So I kind of like pictures because I'm a simple girl. So we have gross working interest. They're responsible for all of the bills. Royalty owners do not share in the cost of drilling a well or the risk according to the terms of the lease. And the net revenue interest is where you start seeing royalty interest carved out, so you can kind of separate the two in your mind with net revenue interest and gross working interest. Your working interest calculations in this well, it's a simple 100-acre well, 100-acre spacing, everybody's happy. The royalty interest owner has a 20% lease rate, which is in the NRI column, and so your unit interest calculation is pretty simple. 100 net acres over 100 total unit acres multiplied by the 20% lease rate is going to give you the 20% unit interest. It can also be interchanged with net revenue interest. We have working interest, so they're going to have 100% in that gross working interest column because they share 100% of the bills. But then the 20% lease burdens their 8/8 interest of the leasehold, so they have an 80% less the 20% royalty burden. So their return on investment, or that 80% back to them for that particular lease, is coming into play. So you have to account for royalty interest, the working interest, and all of the burdens. And if you go to the next slide here, we have, again, gross working interest. All of the working interest is accounted for the bills. And in this particular case, we have an overriding royalty interest owner. So some of you may have an override. Some of you may not know what that is. But basically, let's say that Frank took a lease, and he decided that I was the lessor, and I leased for 20%. And then he decided, I'm going to make a deal here. I'm going to flip the lease to my friend Bryce back there, and then he reserves a 5% override. So that's going to get carved out of the 80% delivered net revenue interest and burden the new working interest owner. So we can go through these formulas again, but essentially it's the same formula for the unit interest column, where you have the net acres over the total unit acres and multiply by the lease burden or the lease rate or delivered net revenue interest. Lots of names. These are my examples, And I would like to ask, who has read Pride and Prejudice? There's a pop quiz. Everybody read the Cliff Notes, right? Okay, good. Well, it's one of my favorite books, and I'm trying to work in some entertainment into some calculations, so bear with me. So Pride and Prejudice is the oil and gas company, and they want to drill a long lateral, and it's a 1,280 acre spacing. So basically, it's two 640s that they're going to drill a long lateral through, and Mr. Darcy is going to own 640 acres in Section 30. In Section 31, Mr. Wickham is going to own 640 acres. So what does that mean for me? Right? So we're going to walk through the royalty calculations. Mr. Darcy negotiated well. He's also the protagonist in the book, and he has a 25% royalty interest. He also got the longer portion of the lateral in his land, so good for him there too. And we'll walk through this calculation. Mr. Wickham is the antagonist and didn't do great things, and he just got a 12.5% royalty and the short end of the stick. Insert polite laughter. Thank you. Okay. So Mr. Darcy, let's talk about his interest in Section 30. You would work that whole section based on the interest in that 640 acre spacing. So he owns 100% of the section, 640 acres, over the total acres in the section, which is 640 acres. And so it's net acres over total unit acres in that particular Section 30. So your denominator in this case is 640. So 640 over 640 multiplied by the 25% royalty rate gives us that net revenue interest of 25%. But then you have to figure out, okay, now I have to apply my allocation factor. So we see that this one is calculated off of lateral length, and these lateral length numbers are not true lateral length numbers. They're simple, again, for my presentation here. But we would take 900 feet of the lateral that's in Mr. Darcy's Section 30 and divide that by the total lateral length of 1,500 feet, 900 plus 600, and we get a 60% allocation factor. What you can't see is there's one more calculation or number over here on the end that gives you the 25% net revenue interest multiplied by the 60%, and that is how you come up with your actual unit interest that accounting will end up with. You will end up with as your proportionate percentage of what you'll be paid on in the well. For Mr. Wickham, it's the same story, right? He owns a whole 640 acre section. The 640 is the denominator because we are allocating this well based on lateral length. So 640 over 640 multiplied by 12.5% royalty, and we come up with a 12.5% net revenue interest. And so then we have to apply the allocation factor. What crosses, how much of the lateral length is in Section 31? And that would be 600 feet. So 600 feet over 1,500 feet gives you 40%, so 12.5 times 40%. And then we create this wellbore interest for the cross-section lateral, the allocation factor that comes into play for this particular well. So this is another same example, but what's going to change here is they've applied, the Oil and Gas Pride and Prejudice has applied for a full 1280 spacing. There's two 640 sections. What's going to happen is your denominator changes. So they're going to say, okay, we're going to go drill this well and hold 1,280 acres. Maybe we had, on the prior example, we had other wells, other 640s drilled already that held the two 640 acres, and then you're going to take a long lateral across. This particular case, Pride and Prejudice decided to go ahead and apply for a full 1,280 acre spacing. Maybe this is their initial well in these two units, and they're holding all of the acreage and developing it maybe more responsibly according to engineering and geology. So same example again, but the biggest thing that's going to change for you is 1280. There is no allocation factor anymore. The lateral length of the well, the lateral feet, does not apply anymore. So we have 640. Darcy and Wickham both own 640 full sections. So 640 over 1280 multiplied by the 25% royalty rate gives you a 12.5% net revenue interest. And then Mr. Wickham, 640 over 1280. That's the kicker. It's not 640 over 640 anymore. It's 640 over 1280 multiplied by his 12.5% royalty rate gets us the 0.0625. Again, this is a lot of numbers and a lot of formulas, but there's a big difference between a pooled unit at 1280 versus a spacing unit that you're just going to use an allocation factor across a couple of sections and allocate it based on lateral feet. There are other states that do this differently. In North Dakota, it's kind of off of an pooled acreage calculation. In Arkansas, they have kind of an encroachment or a footage around the wellbore path that they use, and they calculate and kind of give you an as-drilled plat that gives you all the percentages that cross the different sections. This is most common between Oklahoma and Texas, the way that people allocate the interest. What's important to know for you is to know what you own, one, and know how many acres you own in a particular well, and what kind of pooling or spacing unit that the operator has applied for. And that will affect your denominator, which is either going to be 1280 or 640 or something along those lines. Look, guys, we're going to make it out of here early. Everybody's excited. And we'll open it up to Frank and I for any questions.
Why were longer laterals not done to begin with?
Why were longer laterals not done to begin with?
Well, first vertical wells were done. So I assume you're asking why they weren't done after we started drilling horizontal wells. Some of it is just that necessity is the mother of invention. Improvements on technology come incrementally. So it took a while to just develop the technology to drill horizontal wells to a certain length. And as time goes by, everything gets better. People learn how to drill the wells longer, because as you go longer, there's more risk. You have more risk of getting stuck because you're in the hole longer, you're further out in the wellbore. And so there has to be more engineering done in order to do the longer laterals. When gas prices or oil prices are high, earlier on, people may not have felt the need to do that. As you move into times when oil prices and gas prices are lower, there's definitely a market force that pushes people to start developing technology to help you stay economic.
There's a well out here southwest of town that they claim's the record length of horizontal drilling in the western Anadarko Basin. I'm not sure exactly who that well belongs to, but anyway, it's also rumored that it's one of the biggest producing wells that's come in around this area for a long time. Mm-hmm. My question is there new technology associated with some of the lateral drillings regarding fracking or other things that might give this region and area new potential hopes?
So that well, unfortunately, is operated by Tecolote and not Unit. It's in the Cleveland Formation. It's out by the Mathers Ranch, if not on the Mathers Ranch. The technology continues to progress, and Unit has drilled 10,000-foot laterals. Tecolote is also a company that's drilled long laterals. That may be the longest lateral on the Texas Panhandle. Currently, we could drill longer laterals. Some of it depends, of course, on the land situation, because in order to drill longer laterals, you got to own 3 sections all stacked on each other to keep going. But as you get further and further out, you either have to make your hole size bigger so that your horsepower requirements on your drilling rig and on your frac pumping side don't get out of hand, and that can eat away at the cost savings you have and associated with drilling, say, 1 well instead of 3 wells. It can get very expensive in a hurry. In addition, as you get out further, you just incur more risk. I mean, we're only drilling a hole that's 6 or 7 inches in diameter, and then we're having to run 4.5 or 5.5 inch pipe through that hole. And so keeping that hole open for that period of time without cave-ins is difficult to do. It just becomes more risky. And so, but it is something that's going on up in the Appalachian, the Marcellus and Utica. There's companies drilling over 15,000 feet. So it's possible, and it's possible here.
Thank you. Next.
Yeah, my question's for Donna. My question's for Donna. The example on the multi-section non-pooling example, if your royalty interests, do they have to agree on the same allocation factor? Or can that be calculated differently, like on a lateral feet or a percentage of perf like we heard about earlier in the day?
It depends on the regulatory situation that you are in. Typically, what's seen is the lateral length of the well, and it's not an agreement. It's just based on straight lateral length. Perf rates, I mean, maybe if you have some lease requirements or some special extenuating circumstances, everything's negotiable. I mean, I don't know of any cases currently that have been flipped to that, but that doesn't mean anything because I don't know everything.
I would just add to that the way unit does it is based on completed lateral length. So we take the completed interval is considered the distance from the first perf in the well to the last perf in the well, and then we look at the amount of lateral that's in one section versus the next, and that's how we do our allocation factors. But it's also been talked about that in some cases maybe using the number of perforations could be better. In general, the difference between those two calculations is very small. In a unit, we try to put the same number of we try to structure our perforation amount so that it's very similar to, so that breakdown, whether you did it by the completed interval or amount of perfs, would be very, very similar.
Next.
My question is for Donna. Who determines which way it's calculated, whether it's by the 1,280 or the 640 and the amount in each of those? Is that like the Corporation Commission, Railroad Commission, or does the oil company get to decide how they want to calculate it?
Well, in Oklahoma, it's the Corporation Commission, so you can apply for, kind of going back to what Henry talked about earlier, you can apply for an application to hold a 1,280 acre spacing. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to commit to drilling this 1280 and then maybe stack on have a drilling plan, or there's another way you can go and space 1,280 acres. I know that that's kind of a relatively new thing and that people are starting to do that there in Oklahoma. In Texas, it's Railroad Commission. As Frank noted, there's also maybe some company discretion too and policy on how to divide allocations between sections. Most of them are pretty similar to lateral length. You could get into some perf distances or counts within your section. It just depends on maybe the lease or the extenuating circumstance around that particular allocation.